See some familiar faces in the audience and many who are new to this summit, so welcome. We have a great lineup today. I'll just quickly introduce our panelists and then give just a quick overview of where we've come to this work from the Clayton Christensen Institute. You all get to hear from Clayton Christensen himself tomorrow morning over the breakfast keynote. And then I'll turn it over to the true experts here, Susan Howard and Ken, to talk through different aspects of online learning, its growth, and the course choice movement. So to my furthest left, Susan Patrick, the president and CEO of iNACOL, the K-12 International Online Learning Association. We have Senator Howard Stephenson from the great state of Utah, who was instrumental in putting forward and then passing what was Senate Bill 65, one of the, really the first course choice bill in the country. And then we have Ken Bradford here, Assistant Superintendent at the Louisiana Department of Education, in charge of, I guess, all things content, but focused with a team on managing Louisiana's course choice program and some of the twists and turns that it has taken over the last year since it was passed. So we have a great team of experts up here. I come to this work from a little bit of a different perspective from having studied the world of innovation over the last couple of decades with Clayton Christensen. And what we have observed is that in our research, trying to understand the causal mechanism underlying creative destruction, which powers so much of our economy, is this force called disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation is fundamentally that force that transforms sectors that were characterized by things that were expensive, complicated, deeply centralized, and inaccessible into things that were far more affordable, convenient, simple, accessible, such that it could serve many, many more people. And it's fundamentally the big driver of growth in our economy. And so a lot of people sometimes when they hear the words disruptive innovation will sort of think about a breakthrough improvement or something that's even more expensive or something like that. But what we mean by it is really that focus on simplicity, affordability, accessibility, and decentralization so that it can serve many more people. And so it's disruptive innovation is the force that's transformed things from our computing industry, where personal computers were greatly disruptive, to mainframe and mini computers and allowed everybody to have affordable, simple computing at their fingertips. We've seen disruptive innovation transform retailing. Walmart and Target were far more affordable and accessible than full-service department stores. And now with online retail, Amazon.com and so forth under them, we continue to see this process. And of course, in the mobile phone world, Android is disruptive relative to Apple and iPhone, which was itself disruptive to BlackBerry and RIM. So you see this process continuing to play itself out over and over again. And as we looked at education, what we saw was that online learning had a lot of these characteristics of a disruptive innovation. We were fascinated with its growth and an opportunity to transform both K-12 education as well as higher education. And what we described in the book Disrupting Class, and my co-author, Kurt Johnson, where are you, Kurt? There you are, Kurt Johnson, who's here as well, and Clay Christensen and I, when we wrote about this phenomenon, saw online learning planning itself in the advanced courses that rural schools could not offer to extend access there, in credit recovery and dropout recovery settings to extend access to students who didn't have access to courses that they needed to move forward. And what we've observed is that that growth is continuing, and we made this crazy prediction back then in 2008 that by 2019, 50% of all high school courses would be delivered online in some form or fashion. Now, our observation has been that the majority of that would occur in blended learning settings. But some students certainly are attending full-time virtual schools, which we'll hear a little bit about later and get an overview of the spectrum when Susan talks through how online learning is growing. Many of these in blended learning settings, really where it's online learning in the context of brick and mortar schools. And a piece of that has been this emergence of course choice, where you're taking one-by-one online courses. And so you might be taking a traditional schedule with 1, 2, 3 online courses. And in Louisiana, they've innovated that further by creating blended learning options into that course choice mechanism, which we'll talk about too. So I'll just say that this is growing tremendously in both K-12 and higher education. What excited us about it was not just simply its growth, but its opportunity to transform our education system into one that was fundamentally student-centered and put students first and focused on student learning outcomes. And our sense is that we have this window right now of opportunity by which, if we can shift our focus as policymakers from the inputs that govern school and really toward the outcomes that we would like to see from students, that we can use this opportunity of the growth of online learning to fundamentally transform our education system into the student-centered one. And with that, I think it's a perfect segue to Susan Patrick to describe how these programs are growing, how we should think about funding them, Susan, and how we should think about quality as we move into this world.
Thank you, Michael, and it's an honor to be here with all of you. Our organization, iNACOL, just had its 10-year anniversary, and so while this field is still new and emerging in online and blended learning, the shifts that we've seen over the last 15 years have been very dramatic. And I'm going to share with you an overview, but talk to you about some, I think, very important trends. Our mission is to ask the question, does every student have access to a world-class education? The world is changing very dramatically. The world that our students are coming into is globally competitive, and we need to make sure our kids are successful. And we have the opportunity, leveraging technology, not to layer it on top of old models, but to leverage the technology to fundamentally redesign learning, to transform learning around students' needs, as Michael said. And I think all of us up here are very, very committed to that idea that this needs to be driven by student-centeredness and student needs. I'm just going to start with a quick story. I don't know if you saw this in September in the New York Times, but it was called The Boy Genius of Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia. Did you see this with Batushig? So a principal in Mongolia, in the rural steppes of Mongolia, had his students in high school, and Batushig, then 15, was one of 340 students out of one of MIT's MOOCs, a massively open online course, to earn a perfect score. So 150,000 students, Batushig is one of 340 students to earn a perfect score in circuits and electronics. And where the principal wanted them to have access to this content and material, but set up the electronics labs in their school in Mongolia. And so they took this college course offered by MIT, and the principal of the high school had the students watch the circuits and electronics MOOCs lectures at home, and he wanted to supplement them with the real-world labs. But what Batushig did was he translated all of them back into Mongolian, so the rest of his students in the class could learn as well. Think about this is not the future of education. This is what's happening around the world right now. And we work on policy, on quality standards, and on examining new learning models and new instructional models. And all of our policy work is focused on the United States, but we have over 50 countries that are members of our organization, and what is happening overseas is pretty dramatic in terms of the way they're able to shift and manage this transformation and leverage the technology to offer truly new environments. So let's take just a look. Two key ideas, I think, for U.S. policy. And one is, does every student have access, right, to a world-class education? And what does that look like? And number two, how do you ensure quality? As you have new innovations, how do you look at the quality and the performance metrics? And the second point is something that we are extremely dedicated to. A year ago, released a major report in this area looking at new performance metrics that are much more focused on individual student learning. But over the last 10 years, when I started at this organization, there were about 8 states that allowed full-time online opportunities, about 8 states that had state virtual schools offering supplemental courses. And the big shift that we start to see is that now over half of the states offer full-time online schools, and many of the states, about half of the states, have supplemental online courses. But depending on where you live, and the parents and students and counselors call our offices all the time saying, we have a student that needs to take this course. Why can't we take them online? They live in New York City. They live in New York. Unless their district has a program, they have no opportunities. And so this sense that we have the ability to, one, think about the power of digital learning. It's to move away from this one-size-fits-all classroom, a single textbook, a single teacher, to having online courses where you rethink every bit of content, redesign every bit of content before it goes in that course, and completely rethink the instructional model. And it's that basis of taking the skills, the methods, the data-driven instruction that we've learned over the last 15 years in online learning, and now the big trend is to start to see how do we think about changing the instructional model and blended classrooms that incredible increase in choices to the student in terms of choice down to the lesson level, the increase in the content resources for every student as they move through these pathways, and two, and this is, I think, the big piece, the transparency of data in blended learning environments, using those online tools and resources to completely shift our notions of what education looks like and how it works and what's possible for kids. And we're starting to see this. So transparency, student choice, student-drivenness, and it's not just at the school level, but now it's happening at the course level and even at the lesson level in some of these new blended models. It was fascinating. So we've published since 2007, and I know that Ken and Senator Stephenson in their states are using some of these national quality standards for online courses that help do course reviews when you offer course choice like they do in Utah and in Louisiana and other states. We publish national quality standards for online teaching to help identify the skills and criteria that those competencies that online teachers need that are maybe the same as great teachers in classrooms, but a bigger emphasis on that data and the shifting models using the technology, and also quality standards for online courses. But last year, this is the report I'm pointing to, we led a major effort across the field to identify better student-centered performance metrics based on outcomes for students for online schools and for online courses. And we are looking and talking with a handful of states right now on adopting these quality metrics. We all know that there are certain flaws in the current accountability system in looking at cohorts of students based on birthdays. These actually point out and ask for the data to be reported transparently for online schools and for online courses. And if kids are learning in these environments with the frequent feedback loops and access to the data, why shouldn't we have access to that data and report on that openly and transparently? So we are working to push the field in this direction. We want to ensure quality, and we want to make sure every kid has access. But we want to drive policy in the direction of making sure that access is to the highest quality programs, and policymakers can help us do this by driving this conversation about outcomes-based performance metrics, looking at individual student learning, rolling that data up, measuring classrooms, measuring schools, so that you're protecting and understanding at a much more granular level. Just one more example, every other industry measures quality by benchmarking upon entry, measuring growth during the course of that program, and doing the measurement on the end. That is not how we measure quality in education today. We take a dip step at one point of the year, and then we apply that in all different ways, and those dip steps are important to know where kids are on the trajectory. But this is asking for us to know entry data, benchmarking data, and having a much better understanding of those assessments of student learning throughout the process, so that we can redesign learning to best support the kids in the measurement. So quality assurance for full-time online schools asks for these performance metrics: proficiency upon entry, individual student growth along a trajectory based on standards, graduation rates, college and career readiness, closing the achievement gap, and also fidelity to a student's goals. So the student may move in and out of different settings and different schools, and how well you have closed, you have met that individual student needs. For supplemental online courses, it's proficiency upon entry. There's a huge need for independent assessments at the course level to measure whether the student has actually learned and validate that data on the ground, especially when you start getting into individual course choice and rewarding programs based on proficiency or performance-based funding. Right now, there are different models of performance-based funding down to the individual course that are starting to emerge. Those are mostly completion-based funding models. It gets really interesting in policy if you start thinking about performance-based funding models that reward actual growth and proficiency from a student where they enter and how far they've gone. And so with that, I will turn it over, but that is the big overview of some of the trends. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Susan. Senator Stephenson, let's go to you next and talk about what you did in Utah to create really the first course choice program there and what you've learned since that experience.
Good. Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you today. It's still not on. The green light is, there we go. It's a privilege to be with you today. We had a special session in, hi Giselle. We had a special session in Utah yesterday, so I had to take the red eye out here. So I've been on the plane all night. So you and I are going to experience together the coherency that results from a red eye flight. You know, when we first sponsored this legislation in the 2011 session of the legislature, we really wondered if we would be able to get it through the first year, but we did. When I've been a fan of Michael Horn and Clayton Christensen's work on disruptive technology, I remember their quote that the incumbent providers will always resist the disruptive technology. And we had that in spades on this bill. I sponsored Utah's first charter school legislation 15 years ago. And those creatures, the charter schools, were just as opposed to this as the school districts were. And I thought, well, and they said, well, we're already schools of choice, and we don't want our students to have more choice. But we were able to get it through anyway. So Utah became the first state in the nation to have Digital Learning Now's 10 elements of high-quality digital learning in a comprehensive state policy. We did it by having the funding follow the students to the course from the district and from the charter school. We didn't have to find additional funding because we took it from them. It followed from the LEA, and that's why they were so opposed. They thought it should be layered. This should be a supplemental appropriation. We didn't have to find appropriations for it. And then in the second year, we put categories into the funding based on the relative differences in costs of providing different kinds of funding. We also had no caps on student enrollment, and we have multiple course providers with public and private partnerships. Now, this is key because the first year, the only providers were LEAs, school districts, and charter schools. And the second year, we were going to come back and allow private sector providers to also participate, but we learned we didn't have to, because by that time, the school districts had already contracted to be the provider for K-12 in Utah. Another district became the provider for Florida Virtual. Another district became the provider for Middlebury Academy, and so on. And so we had the LEAs, the districts, and charters creating their own online courses, in addition to contracting with really high-quality providers from outside the state. Now, that's important that we didn't have to come back and allow them a place at the table because they were already there, and it avoided the requirement of trying to determine quality because our LEAs, our districts and charters were already accredited, so we didn't have to worry about that. Rich Crandall in Arizona, his bill was vetoed by the governor because he built a bureaucratic component that had to be funded to assess the quality. If you're having it done through your LEAs, you don't have to do that. Can you really count on government telling you the quality anyway? So the funding is based on successful completion. So we give 50% of the money up front and 50% is paid upon the credit being earned. So it is basically based on completion. And it's designed to overcome the need for credit recovery, because if you don't complete the course in time, we give you 30% instead of the 50% on that second half if the provider finally gets the student to complete prior to graduation based on some statutory parameters. Students customize their education with blended learning. It's not a supplemental. It's not add-on. It's taking away of one of the 8 or 7 semester courses or credits that are funded, and they take one of those and they decide to spend that money at another provider, another LEA. Parents and students choose the courses and the course providers. All public, private, and homeschool students seeking high school credits are eligible this year. And I'm hearing that we have as many private school and homeschool students now taking the course as we have students taking the course from another LEA, which is really something in the first year. Some opponents of the bill said, this is just a mini voucher, isn't it? It's just a course voucher. And during the debate in the legislature, I wouldn't even respond to that question, but I was thinking in my mind, yeah, you're darn right it is. Subject mastery replaces seat time because the students actually, the provider has an incentive to get the kid at mastery in order to get that remaining 50%. Accountability for online course providers is in the place, and program expansion is already automatic. We don't have to come up with an annual appropriation for this because it comes from the LEA itself. So we're not double funding any students. So Utah is the only state, we're bragging here a little bit, to receive an A on the newly released, it's not newly released, this was made earlier, but the Digital Learning Now report card. And this is their quote from that report card. We're pretty proud of that. In 2012, Utah State Line Education Program Act became the model for the American Legislative Exchange Council legislation. Parents for Choice in Education was an organization in our state that every legislator who sponsors choice-type legislation will tell you is the biggest reason that we make this work. And I'd like Robin Bagley and Judy Clark to stand if you could, because these people need to see who you are so they'll know to come to you for assistance if you need it, because they can really help you. So that's what we've done so far, and Michael, back to you.
Terrific, thanks, Senator. Let's go to Ken to talk about the Louisiana flavor of this, which has some similarities but also some differences as you've moved through. The green button. Oh. There we go.
Okay. Good morning. Ken Bradford, Louisiana Department of Education. Yeah, let's start with Senator Stephenson, and as he was just alluding to with Utah. In Louisiana, in the 2012 legislative session, they passed Act 2, which included our course choice program legislation. And we looked at Utah, and the difference between the Louisiana course choice legislation and Utah's was twofold out of the gate. The first part was that we opened it up to third-party providers. It wasn't going to be just school systems. And the second piece was that in addition to being just online courses, the Louisiana Course Choice Program, we were seeking providers that could offer online, fully online, hybrid, or face-to-face courses in our Course Choice Program. And so the Course Choice Program in Louisiana, the intent is to enable students and families to have access to publicly funded course offerings that best match our students' needs. So in our legislative session, once it was passed, the Course Choice Program, I want to talk about whom became eligible and whom was eligible to participate in our program. Legislation was very clear, and it said that we are seeking third-party course providers to offer course offerings to students in Louisiana. Students that attended a C, D, or F public school in Louisiana would be deemed eligible funded, And what this means is that any of the course choice course offerings that the students signed up for would be paid for through public education funding. The courses are going to be free to these eligible funded students. Students that attended an A or B school on the school report cards, those students would be eligible funded for courses that were not currently offered at their school. So what we did also was we set up a course choice counselor assistance center. So if students or parents had questions about what is our school letter grade, or is my student eligible, they can call the course choice counselor assistance center and receive guidance on course offerings. The legislation set up that a course provider could apply through our RFA process, and the course tuition would be set at a ceiling of 90% of 1/6 of our MFP. And that's our student funding formula in Louisiana. So we started the RFA, we put it out, and it went through a 4-stage process. This process took 4 months. And the first stage of the process was they submitted an application. It was a nurturing process. It was a due diligence check. When you submitted the application, it was reviewed. You know, are you in good standing as a provider, as a vendor with the State Secretary of State office? Have you met all the requirements of the RFA? Have you filled it in? Following that, you would get selected for an interview. You came to Baton Rouge. You made a presentation and said, we would like to be a course choice provider. We would like to offer courses to students. Here's what our courses look like. It was a 3-person panel from the Department of Education with our curriculum specialists, reviewed the course offerings. The third stage, once you came out of that panel and you made your presentation, you went to stage 3, and this was our independent expert panel. We went nationwide, and we sought experts in this area of online learning. If it was face-to-face courses and they were CTE courses, we would get those individuals, and we built packages and said, we're in stage 3, please review this application. If you came out of the expert panel, you got to proceed. Then you went to our State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education for the final review. So it was a 4-month process. We had 94 applications that resulted in 42 course providers being approved in the state of Louisiana through the 4-stage process. Of the 42 course providers that were approved by our state board to offer courses in Louisiana, this represented over 900 K-12 course titles for students in the state that they could take. 21 of the providers ended up signing an MOU with the state of Louisiana to offer courses to students in the state. The MOU agreement between the state and the course providers included what their course cost was approved for. It included the provider accountability metrics. How are you as a provider going to be evaluated in this program? And it also included course-specific accountability metrics. How is this course going to be evaluated? So we approved the provider, and then they have a subset of courses that they're authorized to put into the course choice program. What comprised these 42 providers that made it through the process and resulted in over 900 course titles? Corporate and industry associations, educational entrepreneurs. We had cohorts of teachers, 3 teachers that would come together and say, we want to offer an English course. And they are now a course choice provider, those 3 teachers. We had Louisiana school districts, similar to Utah. We had 5 school districts that stepped up and said, we want to be course choice providers. We had our post-secondary education institutions in Louisiana. They're a course provider. We had online and virtual course providers, Florida Virtual School, Connections, Rocket Learning. We have several online course choice providers. So that was a big task. We had to interpret the legislation, come out and have an RFA process for course providers, which culminated after 4 months with 42 being authorized. But we also simultaneously, there's a big chunk of work because we had to have we had to drive this through a registration system. And we wanted a registration system that was parent and student driven. We had previously had a state virtual school. That registration system was school driven, where a school counselor or principal would come into the system and register courses for students. So we started the process of seeking a registration system solution that would be student and parent driven. We ended up partnering and working with Agilix. They've done Ancestry.com website. We partnered with them and said, look, this is what we need. We need a registration system where we can come in and we can populate, up to 50 course providers. They can input their course offerings, and we want it to be student and parent driven. Student and parent. And then we looked at other entities that were doing somewhat similar registration systems, and we kind of feel like we picked and pulled the best parts of each. And right now, the way it works is a student and parent will come into the registration system, and it has the look and feel of Kayak. If you've ever gone to the Kayak search engine to buy a plane ticket or reserve a hotel room, it has that look and feel. Yet when the courses get displayed in there, it looks like you're in iTunes. Like when you go to the app, providers can update the logos, and I'm going to show you what that slide looks like. But so a student would come in. You see in the top right-hand corner of the slide, type to select the course. So if a student were to seeking an Algebra 2 course, they would start typing in algebra. It would start filling out the fields. And then when do they want to take the course? All our providers had to agree in the MOU that coursework could not start before August the 13th. We wanted time to stage all the registrations, ensure students were back in school, and then once August the 13th started, you start delivering the courses. Now, some courses will finish in 6 weeks. Some courses will finish next May 13th. But the start was August the 13th. Couldn't start before August the 13th. And then we built in a zip code feature. And Agilix works really, really hard with us on this feature because remember, some of our courses are online, are face-to-face. So what would happen is the student can do a search within a radius of a zip code that they put in. If they're seeking an face-to-face welding course, they can put a zip code in, and it will show whom are providing welding courses within that zip code. If they're seeking a university English 1010 course and they want to do it face-to-face, they can search within a radius of their home address. So we built that functionality in there. Next slide just demonstrates where we demoed where a student would put in Algebra 2, full year, and then they put in a zip code. This is what it looks like when you hit submit. As you can see here, if you were searching for Algebra 2 today in the course choice program, what would populate is you would have 13 different providers to choose from for Algebra 2. Of those 13 providers, there's actually 21 different Algebra 2 courses. Some providers are offering in hybrid fashion, some fully online, and some face-to-face. On the left-hand side, you'll see several different things. You can check a box to exclude a provider, check a box to include a provider. You can search for local courses, put in your zip code, search for hybrid courses, etc. And the providers update their logos. So it's very user-friendly. It's very appealing to both students and parents. And what this process would culminate in is a student or parent, they're going to look at the different elements of the courses. And of the tuition bids for these particular courses here range from $350 from one provider up to just over $1,200 for other providers. So the pricing of the courses is different. And what comes with different courses is unique to each provider. Some providers are providing on loan to the students mobile learning devices preloaded with software. Some providers it's fully online. Some providers it's face-to-face and they're providing textbooks. So the students and parents can go through the plethora of offerings and see which one is most customized to fit their needs. Now, at this point in the registration process, if you clicked on one and you found the appropriate course that you wanted to take, the next step is it would say, click here to register. And when a student or parent clicks there to register for courses, a notification then goes to the school site. And it goes to the school principal, whom in turn can actually delegate down to a counselor or a lead teacher, and they validate the enrollment. And what that does is it puts a checks and balance in the school that, one, there is this student that attends that school. Second thing it does is it allows the counselor to get involved to ensure that, one, the course is academically appropriate, it's logistically doable, and that it's sequenced right for the students. If a student goes to summer school and they were enrolled in Algebra 1, they passed Algebra 1 in summer school, then they don't need it in the fall. Then what happens is they would, at that point in time, make a notation that the student doesn't need this course. If the student, then when they validate the enrollment, a notification goes to our course providers. There's a back-end dashboard on this for the providers and the school sites, and they can go in. Part of our MOU agreement is that on the 1st and the 15th of every month, course providers have to submit a grade in progress. So parents, students, school counselors, school teachers, principals, on the 1st and the 15th, you can come in there and you can see the progress of your student grades.
Perfect.
Michael, may I comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Howard.
It's interesting. Is it on now? It's interesting that Agilix is a Utah company, and we don't have this in our law, so I'm a little bit embarrassed here. But we will, in the next session, we're going to adopt this, because isn't this an amazing menu for people to be aware of what's available and to be able to choose? And to add a rating system to this, too, will even turbocharge it more. So we're getting with our local Agilix people to get that done. The other thing that we're going to do, too, is that because the LEAs who now have stepped up to try to keep customers by providing their own online courses, those are not counted currently as part of Utah's numbers, and there are thousands of kids who are taking online courses from their local LEAs, and we want to count those so we'll look better on Susan's chart.
We're going to come back to that question in a moment, but we have a bit of a surprise today, which is we've just heard a lot about Wonkland here and how to set this up. But we actually have a student who's enrolled in a Florida Virtual School program, not from the course choice perspective of Florida Virtual School, but actually the full-time Florida Virtual School program. And her name is Lauren Lee. She's out there. And so I thought it'd be worthwhile, Lauren, if you just tell folks why you enrolled in Florida Virtual School and what's the experience like for us to get a sense of what does it mean to take an online course when you're in high school.
You can hear me right? Okay, all right. So, well, what I did with Florida Virtual School, the reason I did it was the flexibility. Flexibility to do what classes you want to do and when you want to and where you want to. For example, right now I actually have my laptop here with a couple notebooks, and I can do my work later when I'm done with this. I'm a little behind on some stuff, but we can just avoid that for right now. And so for Florida Virtual School, you have that flexibility when you want to do it. So perhaps I didn't want to do picking random class. Perhaps I didn't want to do some art class that was there. I didn't have to do it. I'm not forced to. I have these. I do all the core classes. You can kind of choose which ones you want to do from electives, though you normally can do that regular school too. And you can do it when you want to. So, for example, over the summer, past summer, 2013 summer, I did an entire Algebra 2 course within about a month. It would have gone shorter, but there's a 14-day rule that I had to go with. And so I could do that as quickly or as slowly as I wanted. My pace is definitely faster than most other people. If you ask them, they'll probably say we're faster, but no, you're not. I do things pretty quickly, and so at normal schools and public school, I've done public and private, so they kind of went a little slower, and you learn a thing a day. right now I can just go zip through it and be done within a month. So I did that once. Gonna do it 2 months for 2 courses now. Gonna keep that with that. And so for my day, pretty much what I do, I wake up about 9 o'clock something. That's why if anyone was noticing, I was yawning because I woke up at like 6 something and I was really tired because I go to sleep at 10. I stay up for an hour just sitting there and thinking and being creative as I always do. But I wake up and the first thing I do, I literally just rush to my computer, log in, go on to Florida Virtual School, and start doing assignments. I don't really do anything except for that for the first couple of seconds, other than, what's going on? I need to wake up now. So after that, somebody finally says, Lauren, go do your other stuff. I'm like, okay. And so I start doing classes then, and I normally take about an hour or so for each subject, I think. Yeah. And so I kind of do through the day. I'm staying at home. I do other things, but I mostly am at home at my computer, typing furiously, looking, listening through my headphones, and kind of going, all right, got that? Did I get that? Got my notebook? All right, did I write that down? Okay, I may need that. Do I? And then I just kind of question myself about that. So Florida Virtual School is pretty good for that. So I also like the fact that I can travel. For example, I think November, December, we're going to go, my mom and my aunt and my uncle were thinking about, we would go visit my granddad in Hong Kong because none of them have really seen him since 2008, except for my aunt. She goes there often. She's a traveler. And so we were thinking, well, why don't we go and visit him? Because we haven't seen him in a long time, and we have no idea when he's going to die. It's going to be unexpected, probably. So we want to make sure we get that in. So yeah, that's pretty much
perfect.
Everything.
Thank you for that. So because of the flexibility, Lauren will be here and can take questions either during the session but also afterwards. So thanks for being here and giving us a student perspective on what this looks like. Howard, or Senator, I want to go, Howard's fine, good. So I want to go back out to you actually off that, because something that we've talked a lot about is something from our research on innovation about why students hire school.
Yeah.
And a couple particular reasons and sort of how that struck you about how course choice fits into that. I'll let you tell the story.
You know, Clayton, Christensen's and Michael's work on what job a milkshake is hired to do, and we'll probably hear a little bit about that from Clayton tomorrow, hopefully, but they extended that in the book, How Will You Measure Your Life? Clayton expands upon that on what job do students hire school to do. We know what adults hire school to do. They hire it to educate their children, to create a good educated citizenry, economic development, and daycare. That's one of the jobs. Mm-hmm. And we're doing great at daycare, but according to the international rankings on PISA and TIMSS, we're not doing so great with the other ones. But these folks came up with what job students hire school to do, and it's very different. One is that you would think of right away is to have fun with friends, and the second is to feel successful. Having fun with friends, these online schools, you should see some of the online high schools where kids get together who have never had friends in their own high schools, and suddenly it's like, remember the movie E.T., where E.T. they go trick-or-treating and they see this kid dressed up as Yoda, and E.T. goes up to Yoda because finally he's found somebody like him. That's what these kids do. They say, there is somebody like me in the world. And they discovered it through online courses and online high schools. It's amazing how kids get together and they do things socially together. So you're filling that need. And by the way, if kids aren't having that need filled by school to have fun with friends, they fire schools. 25% of our kids fire their schools by dropping out. And there's a lot of kids who fire schools even though they're still in the seat. The second feature, though, is even more important, and that is to feel successful. And what we found is that by getting immediate interactive feedback provided through digital means rather than batch processing kids in a class of 30 and hoping to move them forward in a batch. By individualizing that instruction, you really do give feelings of success. And brain researchers, I'm not a brain researcher, but I play one in the legislature, have found that what is delivered when you get that immediate feedback is dopamine. And it is why learning is so joyful. And we need to be giving kids more daily doses of dopamine, and that keeps them embraced in the school system, and that's why they hire. That's what they hire schools to do, and we need to. And this is an amazing way of providing both of those.
So I have a few questions out of that, but don't tweet that Senator Stephenson is advocating drug dealing. But Susan, I want to go to you off that, because one of the biggest barriers that we've found in our research to that opportunity to create success for students is seat time rules in states. And if you could talk a little bit about that shift from seat time to competency-based or mastery-based learning, and how these course choice programs then, from all of you, start to move us toward that as well would be great.
This is fundamental. It's bigger than digital learning. It's fundamental to transforming the education system around making sure every child is successful. Because if you think about it, when we do international comparisons, we're not asking them, we look at funding levels, we're not asking them, how do you fund your schools? I was over in Europe for an EU conference on an advisory group, and they said, what's your #1 biggest policy issue? And my response was the fact that we fund the number of minutes a kid sits in a seat as the fundamental structure, right? Seat time. Their jaws dropped. They're looking at me like, that's insane. Why would you ever do that, right? And the thing is, this is the foundation of our system. And so if you move from seat time to competency-based education systems, that means, and we have a definition, we've published a number of reports over the last 3 years. One is a state policymaker's guide. #1, their 5-part definition. #1, students advance upon demonstrated mastery. Show what you know. You have to demonstrate that knowledge and that you understand it at high levels. And that's that feedback and success loop. #2 is that assessment is a meaningful experience for the students, right? If they don't show proficiency, if they don't show advanced mastery, then they have to figure out what it is they're missing and fill those gaps in. And 3, you've got clear and explicit learning objectives and goals. They are empowered by that goal, therefore they can go find different ways of doing it, different content, different methods, whether it's online or face-to-face or through a project, so that they demonstrate it. 4 is that they get immediate interventions. They get immediate response and help when they're not showing that. So you can't let these huge gaps take place. It's insane to me that so many of our kids, we see the data, kids coming into 9th grade in urban areas at a 3rd or a 4th grade math or reading level. How does that happen? Because we don't have a map of all the standards. We let them have these huge, Saul Kahn calls it Swiss cheese gaps in their learning. We keep passing them on because we're structured on a time-based system. Time-based system says, oh, you got a C or a D, go on to the next level, the bell's ringing. When you restructure an entire system around competency, you have to rethink the way everything works: instruction, learning, assessment, and then all of a sudden you have this fine-tuned data on proficiency, and you can roll that up. And that is the magic of what a transformed system has to be built on competency. Blended and online resources and tools can help drive that in ways never before to this personalized learning model where every kid can demonstrate success.
Perfect. Can you guys talk about in the course choice programs how you're moving, how that's enabling you to move closer toward that competency-based system?
In Louisiana, we have the conditions set through policy right now that allows for the proficiency and the mastery-based learning. What we're doing now is we are in year 2 of the RFA. We're seeking our year 2 additional course providers to add our new offerings to our portfolio for students to choose from. And one of our focus areas in year 2 course choice is to seek providers that can offer modular-based, scaffolded learning opportunities for students.
Well, and from the very beginning, we decided that we weren't going to pay the providers until students showed that competency, until that mastery is achieved. And what Susan says is exactly right when she calls it insane. You know, in the 19th century, you had to move kids forward in batches. And, you know, the typical classroom has a width of ability of at least 5 years wide. And to expect a teacher to do that through manual methods when you can fill up the gaps individually for each student with computer adaptive instruction that will meet their needs at their level and their speed. And of course, Howard Gardner's work on learning styles shows that we have multiple intelligences. So instead of that bell-shaped curve of a classroom being 5 years wide, it's actually a three-dimensional bell because it's a slice for every modality of learning that each child uniquely has of their own, whether they're oral learners, visual or kinesthetic or whatever it is. So digital learning and online learning has the ability to respect the learner. I mean, that is such an important concept. We as humans want to learn, even those that seem to be disengaged. And the reason they're disengaged is because we're not meeting them at their level. And this adaptive digital process can do that. There's no reason why any student should move on when they get a 76% on their final exam. It used to be in the 19th century that if you're going to fill up that gap, because another kid who got 76% had a deficiency in a different area than this kid with a 76%. And these kids with 84% had different ones altogether. So the teacher had to teach the entire course for everybody all over again, and everybody had to sit through the whole thing again. But today, you don't have to do that. You can fill up those gaps uniquely for each student. It's an amazing thing, and it's about time our whole system caught on to that and started respecting learners.
To the Senator's point, you know, with our course choice program, you know, we fully believe what you just pointed out as well. And, you know, for young students like Lauren, who, you know, once she finishes her Algebra 2 course, you know, we'd like to see the situation where she could now come into course choice and choose the next course in the sequence. You know, that's a pre-calculus or a geometry. But we also think it's about providing access to the students. In Louisiana, we have multiple school configurations: K-12, K-8, 6-8, 7-12. And when we went and did an inventory of Algebra 1 course offerings to our 8th grade students in the state, there were over 100 schools in the state of Louisiana that did not offer Algebra 1 to 8th grade students. And so, you know, there were students that were ready for Algebra 1 and they didn't have access to it. And so, you know, through programs like course choice initiatives and such, you know, they'll now have access to those course offerings so that they can continue moving along at their pace that's appropriate for them.
So let's dive in a little bit more into the quality outcome piece, because you've both alluded to some of the funding mechanisms that you've put in place, but Susan's also alluded to the fact that we're sort of have another step maybe to go in getting toward truly student performance based. So I don't know who wants to lead out, but actually maybe Ken, can you describe how the funding mechanism for these providers in Louisiana, because I don't think we got that from you. We heard it from Howard, and then sort of walk forward about what you've learned about what's working and not working in that process toward meeting Susan's ideals, and then maybe Susan, if you could comment.
Sure. So the Louisiana funding mechanism is that in the initial legislation, it was that a provider would submit a tuition, a proposed tuition, and it had to be of, the statute said this, fair market value, and it could not exceed 90% of 1/6 of that student's MFP. With our state average MFP around approximately $8,000 per student, it equated to about $1,200 would be the ceiling. At the end of the day, the tuitions came in and they were between $350 and $1,200 as an example for an Algebra 2 course in the Louisiana course choice program. What we do is it is a 50% payment, similar to Utah's, once the student starts the course and begins work. Upon successful completion of the course, the second 50% payment is made. If the student does not complete the course on time, a provider only receives 40% of the remaining payment, not the 50%. And so we have payment intervals. So, you know, we have courses that are on full year. So the first payment will go out to providers in early September after the student has started the coursework and is engaged in course activities and there's been a grade in progress submitted. Second payment will go out in January to the course provider if it's a fall block course, meaning that they're taking the course in one semester. When the course ends, they'll get the second payment. If it's year long, when the course ends in May, they will get the second payment.
Perfect. And is successful completion defined by the provider or by a Louisiana assessment? How does that work, or it depends?
Successful completion means that they worked through all the coursework and a grade has been provided for that student in the course.
Perfect. Howard?
That's the same for Utah.
Okay. And Susan, where do you see the gaps still in that policy moving toward a more outcome-based orientation?
And I think we're challenged right now, as I mentioned, with the current accountability system. If we really want to know, did a student learn what they said they learned, right? If we really want to reward performance, then we need to do a better job of getting independent assessments that show and validate that data on the ground. I think that's the big idea. And so when we have been working on this project, researching performance-based funding models and completion-based funding models over the last year, the feedback that we've gotten from policymakers is wanting to think of it also along a continuum, and that the completion-based funding models are a step moving in that direction. But if we really wanted to reward and incentivize student performance and success and successful completion, it would require a validating or a moderating assessment at the course level. And there are many untested grades and courses, but you would want to validate that data on the ground to ensure that they move through the entire course, but they're actually demonstrating high levels of mastery, and reward the programs that offer the highest quality opportunities and serve all kids, provide equity. We want to make sure that there's not cherry picking, creaming off the top. So ensuring that all students, and that's why that benchmarking on the way in and then showing the progress is really important. It's something that our current accountability systems really fall short on today.
Perfect. So I just want to make sure we sort of make this point very clear. Right now, the system pays no matter how you do. What these programs have done is moved it to, you actually have to complete to get some of the funding. And then the third step we're saying is actually put some real validating assessments or moderating assessments on demand as a student finishes to show actual learning progress would be that third step, because otherwise you might leave it that there's incentives just to say a student passed through without being able to show an independent validation of that.
Let me just tell you a little history of when I was presenting the bill in committee and noted that 50% of the money would be paid upon completion of the course and the student receiving a grade. The teachers union head in Utah came to the witness table and said, we believe that none of it should be paid until the student completes and gets a grade. To that, I said, well, I would be willing to put an amendment into the bill to do that if we had that also for all of education. And they stopped mentioning that. But one thing I'm interested in, and I still don't have an answer for, is quality. How we hope to have an Agilix type dashboard up there and also have some ratings by students. That would be helpful. But how, I can see some students will say, which provider can I get through easiest and get my grade? Are there ways that we can begin to look at quality without creating bureaucracies that if you count on your local State Department of Education to measure quality, if you've looked at the comparison between your state's claims of 4th and 8th grade mastery in math and reading, they're up here at 80–90%. But the NAEP score for your state is more like 30% or so. And so you really can't count on those folks assessing it with some validity. I'd like...
No, I mean, and I think that's to Susan's point, having independent assessments tied to standards. That's why that's probably the gold standard we have to go toward, right? So, Susan, do you have a thought on that?
There's also a really important relationship between inputs and outcomes. So right now we put way too much focus on the inputs, and we need to allow these innovations to take hold. But there is an important part of our online course quality standards. Just the first bar is on, are these aligned to your state academic standards? That's a baseline input on having someone evaluate that I think is pretty important at the input side. But measuring those inputs as and the amount of interaction, this is another really interesting trend that's emerging out of looking at blended and online learning, is that right now we don't have the right words or terms to talk about the increase in interactions that happen in these new learning models, because we are used to describing them in static student-to-teacher ratios. But when you look at it, especially in the blended models within classrooms, students are often in one-on-one situations or 1-on-8 situations with 8 kids with a teacher or small groups. And there's a different way of measuring, thinking about that interactivity from student to student and student to teacher, that we need to get better at describing the instructional model and what takes place there, and what that ends up looking like in terms of student outcomes. And I think that gets to some of the asking for student satisfaction surveys on it. And kids are amazingly honest when you give them the opportunity to provide feedback. And so giving them some more agency to give feedback in these learning environments, I think, is really important too.
Also, making sure that in those courses that are core courses that have statewide assessment, end of level or end of course tests, those ought to be reported, and we ought to be shining a bright light on the providers and what they get in terms of results.
Perfect. So let's, we're going to go out to audience questions in just a moment. So if you want to start to line up, queue up behind the microphones there, that'd be terrific. Just one last question from me, which is one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm curious, Ken, if it's happened in Louisiana too, but as I've observed Utah, is that as these course choice programs have emerged, it's not necessarily that all students start to take all their courses through the course choice mechanism, but actually a lot of districts start to innovate as well by creating blended learning offerings in particular. Can you just give a little sense of that?
Yes, it was amazing to me to see when districts and charters had the fear of losing funding by students taking courses one at a time from other providers. They all stepped up and instantly had an interest in providing their own online courses. And they've created consortia where they get together as a group of districts and create courses. They don't want those dollars to be fleeing from their districts. So they all have begun offering them. And as I mentioned before, we don't have the numbers on those that are provided online courses within the district, and we need to get that so that we can accurately assess how it's going.
The same effect took place in Louisiana. In Louisiana, several school districts started offering their own innovative online programs, and they actually used the course choice program when they saw that here are the 42 providers that the State Department has evaluated and vetted and are offering through course choice. Not only did they use that as a reference point, but they also used the tuitions that between the $350 and $1,200 as a bargaining chip when they went out with providers. And some of the providers in our state course choice program are now providers in the local school systems. And on the, I just would add also on the accountability piece, is Susan was talking about. I think there's two elements to that too. There is the course provider accountability, and then there is the course itself accountability. And we envision that there will be a course provider accountability and they have, let's say, 25 course offerings that they're offering through our course choice program. But if there is any one of those 25 courses that's not measuring up to those course accountability metrics, then we can exit that from the program. So we could still have a provider, but now they're offering 24 courses and not the 25 courses. So
and you
two
have a
pieces.
process for.
Correct, and it's the iNACOL standards. There's the quality for programs, and then there's the quality for courses, and so it's a twofold accountability.
Terrific. So we have a long line of questions and not a lot of time. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just make sure that your one sentence ends with a question mark and not a period. And then and we'll do our best here to clip our answers to get through these. So let's start there.
Thank you very much again for your work on legislation and course choice. I was wondering if you could provide some color to the question of student privacy and FERPA compliance when we go into the online world. I'm guessing that Florida Virtual Academy might be LEA. Would that be true also for the other providers?
Okay. Who wants to take that on the FERPA and privacy implications of course choice?
Well, our Department of Ed requires it, so the standards there are pretty strict that student privacy has to be maintained.
Yeah, I would say this similar. We have policies that are in alignment with FERPA compliance as well, and at the end of the day, the providers through our course choice program, several of them are the same providers in the districts, and we have to follow the FERPA compliance.
Okay. Jesse.
Yes. Excuse me. Jesse Woolley Wilson from Dreambox Learning. A quick comment and then a question. The comment is I'm inspired by the use of the adaptive technologies, and I'm just wondering if the recommendation engine technologies that exist in Amazon, Netflix, things like that, might be utilized to suggest to students upon successful completion what might be next in their learning path. Just something. And then the question is, you guys have talked about respecting students, and you've talked about a new paradigm of learning. I'm wondering if part of your vision is that students use the courses that they want to use regardless of their age and grade, and how that overlays with what's happening in the public education system.
Go ahead, Kim.
Sure. We could spend a whole other session or two talking about competency-based learning models, but one of the key components of that is for each student to have their own personalized learning map. And when you have that map and you know how learning builds along that map, when a student hits a certain point on that map, and there are several different potential pathways to get to success for college and career readiness or success at graduation, that certainly is part of this vision in terms of being really grounded in what our expectations are for kids so that they're held high, so that kids will be successful in this world that they're going out into, but that you have the ability for students to move through in different ways and have more options than they do in this one-size-fits-all world that we live in today. Thanks.
Ken?
No, and with our Agilix registration system, some of our year 2 functionality that we are currently exploring is one, some of the crowdsourcing type of reviews, star rating for once the course is complete where there can be feedback given. And the second element would be for students if they went and they chose an Algebra 2 course from a particular provider, where they might be able to see also students and parents who viewed this course also explored this, and so it would add some of those features that were alluded to.
Perfect. Let's go out there.
Thank you. My name is Yovel Badash, the author of No Child Held Back. I have a question about technology and pedagogy. It sounds like from the legislative process, you guys have focused a lot of the bureaucracy, the quality assurance, the completion, the budgeting, and all that. How much does technology play a role in the process of legislation, or the Agilix system? How do you get the data from that system to the student information system of the school or the district or the state? Do you take that into account? Because that has a lot of cost above it that it could be far exceeding the $1,200 that you pay for the course.
Ken, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So real quick, a couple of points to that. When I alluded to the funding mechanism and the initial funding mechanism, which was 90% of 1/6 of the MFP, the 10% that remained is for administrative type of costs for the school system. To your second point about the technology, in our model right now, there's a back-end dashboard where that school counselor and principal log in and they can see the student progress. At the end of the day, the grade is transcripted by the school. And so we have a school point of contact for each school. So when December hits, student just completed Algebra 2, that school level counselor has access. They come into the system, they see what the grade is, and it's transcripted to the, it's transcripted on the student's transcript at the school level.
You know, that's a great question. It ties in with the last one because I have this vision, this dream that someday students will be able to have a sticky social media tool that will be more interesting to them than Facebook or all these other tools that will drive information to them based on their student profile, their achievement, their interests, all of those kinds of things. So if you have that kid in a rural district who is an expert on extremophiles, those living forms that live only in extreme conditions, and he's been researching and commenting on that, he gets pushed to him a notice saying at this university 50 miles from your home there's going to be a NASA scientist speaking on extremophiles, and you have a ticket here, click here if you want it, and if you want $50 stipend to pay for your gas to get there, click here. It's that kind of thing while still respecting the FERPA laws. Can you imagine what that would do? The Cicero group did a study of who knows most about careers. The student, the high school student, his parents, the teacher, or the counselor, and they were in that order. The students knew the most, followed by the parents, followed by the teacher. The counselors knew the very least. We can't expect the counselors to be that bottleneck for providing this kind of suggestion of what you're going to do next. ConnectEDU has a tool that does that a lot of your states are already using, but we need to combine them so that it works with the dashboard here, and that's my vision of the future, and it's going to come, I'm sure. It's a disruption,
so to speak. So we have time for literally one last question, so I apologize to the others. We're going to go here to the right, and then you can mob our speakers afterwards and get your shots of dopamine. So.
I'm Sarah with School Choice Ohio, and I have a real short question, so hopefully this will leave time for everyone to mob you. You mentioned, Senator Stephenson, that homeschoolers are eligible to participate, and I presume this could also be the case in Louisiana, and that you did not have additional appropriations, that those students' funding came from the school that they were attending. Homeschoolers obviously don't have that appropriation. Where did their funding come from?
That's a very good question. Thanks for that clarification. The students who are already receiving funding, that money is taken from their LEA and is sent to the new provider. As far as the homeschool and the private school students, they now do have an appropriation for that. We didn't actually have to fight for an appropriation this year because it's written into the law that the State Department of Ed will fund it. And so as that expands and grows, there will be some of that, but it is minuscule compared to the number of courses taken by the students from local LEAs.
Thank you so much to the panelists, and enjoy the rest of the day.